All right, we are back once again. Hello there, good afternoon in the chat. Loud and clear. There's Stevie there, my man in the chat. We're off once again. We're back with a more topical movie than what we'd usually get into today, Wag the Dog. I think I've seen in the chat there seems to be quite a few people who know about it. And I'm back with my old buddy Endeavour to take another look at another. Well, I don't know. This is kind of pushing it into the classic movie. Like, is it a classic movie? Maybe not. You could dispute that, but you know, it's got a lot of interesting things in there for the current year. Good afternoon in the chat there. We've got the lovely, all the regulars back. I see Grief there. There's a special crowd for the classic movies that I like on a Sunday afternoon. How are you doing, Endeavour?
Not bad. I am currently in a rogue nation as of about a month or so ago. But all that aside, I think life's actually not going too badly so far. So,
I mean,
I'm surviving.
I mean, I'll give a little bit of inside info to the chat there. I don't really like streaming very much because I'm always worried in case something goes wrong and you can't correct it when you're live and all of this. But we had like 3 minutes to go, and Endeavour couldn't hear me. He couldn't, and it was we didn't know what the problem was. And then it was like he had to change browser because he was using Google. And so you can see, like, in my opinion, that's because you're in a rogue nation. And there's all kinds of dirty tricks going on. But that was a bit of a panic there, a bit of a panic. But we are that like this. Oh, well, all right, let's just jump in because obviously the current events and the movie that we're going to look at today, it is Wag the Dog, 1997 movie with Robert De Niro, Dustin Hoffman, Anne Hesh. There's a few others pop up there, and we've also got it's directed by someone similar background to Dustin Hoffman called Barry Levinson. And I think normally what we do is like sort of outline the plot on a film, but then kind of wander off on a tangent. And on this one, like, it's so on the nose, and we can get into that later. But I think it's worth kind of going through the plot in more kind of like more closely than what we would usually do. Would you agree, Endeavour? Because it's really just basically what's going on in the world. It's so unbelievable that it's so on the nose. I can't believe it. What did you make of Wag the Dog?
Well, I just thought that it was a film of basically Hollywood and their connections and government. It's basically them just laughing at us. Devin Stack made a great video about the movie a couple years ago, and a lot has happened since then. I think he made the video 3 years ago before the post 2020 craziness. But one thing he pointed out very astutely in the video is that it's probably good to mention this at the beginning, is that there's a scene of them exiting the White House. And that means that in order to make this movie, they actually had to have access to the White House. So they actually needed to have permission to use the facilities, meaning that the Clinton administration at the time read the script for this movie and then approved it and said, yeah, we'll let you use the White House to film this. So it basically is them just showing you what it's basically them showing you how the world works and how they exert power through media and just showing that you outright.
Yeah. And like it's from 1997, and like there's some reasons why, like you can play around with why they did that. But before we get all of that good stuff, I'll just outline kind of what happens, because there may be some people listening in. Like, I know that normally on some of the classic movies streams, you may think, oh, bugger, I haven't seen that movie. I wouldn't worry about that on this one, because it's what it's about is, so there's a presidential election coming up. It's set in 1997, and the sitting president has been caught sort of in a sexual liaison with, it's not a Girl Scout. It's something similar to a Girl Scout, but they've called it's something slightly different.
A Firefly girl.
I don't know what that is, but what happens is they've now decided that this is a disaster. They've got 11 days to go, and then it's going to be the election. and now this sex scandal basically is going to be dropped. So Robert De Niro comes in as this kind of deep state Mr. Fix-It type character, and he's in charge of like taking care of what is like basically a crisis. And so he decides that this is what I mean about when you we may have to stick closely to the beats of the story, like more closely than what we usually do, because it begins where there's a press conference and the journalists are actually, I mean, they wouldn't do that these days, but the journalists are asking about the sex scandal. And the what do you call it? What Jen Psaki is today, the press secretary or whatever, is kind of put on the spot and doesn't know what to do. So Robert De Niro has like an earpiece, and as Blackpill said, they didn't see them as much back in like the 90s. So so what happens is he starts telling them what to say, and they've got their own people in the press conference to try and muddy the waters and throw them off. And this is where you get the first inkling that it's PR and it's spin, but they're going to take it to a whole new level. And what they decide to do to kind of cover over, to bury the sex scandal, is to invent a war. And then it comes out, well, how are you going to do that? They also have these fake stories about B-3 airplanes, which apparently just didn't exist. And it's all to throw the press off the scent and, you know, confuse everybody. And they decide that they're going to this is where it gets juicy. So they decide that Albania is a rogue state, and they choose Albania because the average American hasn't got a clue where Albania is. They don't know whether Albanian likes Americans or not. So they kind of just think, yeah, whatever, the chumps at home will just they'll just buy into everything. So Albania is a rogue state, and they say they've also got they're against American freedoms and the American way of life. They've also got a suitcase which has got a nuclear bomb inside it, and they're going to smuggle it through the Canadian border. So they go to see Dustin Hoffman, who's a famous Hollywood movie producer, and they get him to produce the war. Now, this seems like completely ridiculous. Like, and in 1997, like this is a comedy. One of the reasons they got away with this because it's framed as a comedy. And so they basically produce a war in a studio and get it sent out for the American public. So all of a sudden, the sex scandal gets completely buried. So that we'll get into what else happens later. What do you think of that as a kind of outline?
Yeah, it's good. Basically the plot of the movie is that in order to distract the public, they'll basically just invent the news. That pretty much the premise is that the news is basically just narratives invented by those in power to benefit them at any given time. And the point of the movie is just how effective narrative really is at controlling people. They just come up with this narrative about a war in Albania, and one thing that's one reason that maybe it's not as effective today. I think one of the reasons is they have a lot less finesse with the stuff they do, but also today we actually have the internet, and of course the masses will still go along with what the mainstream media says, but there will be a section of the population, like the dissident right, who will actually not go along, and they'll be able to have access to additional information via the internet. But back then, before the internet was a really big thing, you would have no access to any information other than what the media tells you. And by the late 90s, media was already a pretty huge part of people's lives. It was not as ever present as not nearly as ever present as it is today, but still, in comparison to a century earlier, it was definitely had become a lot bigger part of people's lives. And pretty much, what you'd believe would only just be what the TV would tell you, because, like they use the example of Albania, you didn't have the internet back then. Is anyone going to go to the library and read like an encyclopedia on Albania or something like that? I mean, where are you going to find out about Albania? The only way of finding out about it is on the news, and it's not like you can fly there or anything. So basically, they can just invent a completely fictitious war and then broadcast it through the media. And for the people on the ground in the United States, that just seems to be what reality is, because they have no other way of actually judging what's true and what's not.
I mean, watching it again, there's lots of little touches, and I just kept bursting out laughing when I saw them, because when I first saw it, I didn't really get it. But one of the things, and it reminded me of some of the like, in Britain, we did this thing where people came outside and banged pots and pans for the NHS, and it turns out there's lots of little, it's the same thing, and there's lots of little things like that in it, and one of the things it's dropped in, it's just like little throwaway lines here and there in the movie. It's very well written. I will say it's a very tight, well written, witty script. And there's a part in it where somebody says, "Oh, well, just like what we did with the yellow ribbons." So in the Desert Storm campaign, which was the first Gulf War, what they had this campaign in America where people tied yellow ribbons around things to show solidarity. And Anne Hesh says, "Well, yeah, but that was a grassroots thing." And De Niro's looking as if to say, "Oh, yeah, of course it was." It's so funny, and you think these bastards. So just to kind of go on with the rest of the plot, it becomes quite ridiculous. But so what else happens is that the presidential candidate who was set to win because of the sex scandal, which is now being covered up by the fake war, he knows that this is all fake. He doesn't believe that there's a war going on, and neither do the CIA know there isn't, but they want to know, like, who are you and what you're doing here? We've done all the checks, like. The Albania are shitting themselves, because the real country of Albania thinks they're about to get carpet bombed, and of course there's nothing going on. But the presidential candidate comes out, and he goes on television and he says, "Good news, everybody! Tensions in Albania have died down. There's no war anymore. It's all over," because he just wants to get back to talking about the sex scandal. So he has to kind of say, "Well, the war was real, but now it's ending, and it's all over." so that they can get back. It's so ridiculous, and in order to make up for that, so then they spin it again. They just go to another level of spin, and they say, "Okay, well, the war has ended, but oh no, like there's an all-American hero has been left behind called Schumann." And then they craft this new narrative where, like, a good old American boy's been left behind, and now he has to try and, like, get out of Albania, and he becomes a folk hero. They make fake songs about him, and they make up a nickname, and they call him Old Shoe, and that's where you get the stuff where people are throwing their shoes across onto trees and across telephone lines and whatnot. So then they fly him back with lots of fanfare. It does become a little bit sort of kind of farcical. But good old Shoe turns out that he was in jail and he raped a nun. So it's like this, just laughing at the normies. It's such a cynical film. And it makes you think, well, back in 1997, this was just a wild comedy, and it's not anymore. It's kind of as Blackpill said in his review, it does fill you with a bit of rage seeing this.
I mean, one thing I liked was how the fake song that they actually made it. They actually made a fake song and then put it in the Library of Congress, and they what they said was that this song was like from the 1930s. It was this old song, old country song called Old Shoe, and then from the 1930s, and it's going to be dug back up, and now it's going to be played on the radio for William Schumann. And they even have like a scene where one of their plants basically she sleeps with a journalist, and then she says to him, didn't they have this song from back then called Old Shoe? I'm kind of trying to remember it. And then the journalist puts this in the news, and then this fake song, which they say is from the 1930s, all of a sudden it's playing on the radio. I just find it so it's incredible, because things like this actually do happen today. Like, think about how much they've rewritten history. Now, I mean, oftentimes it's by like picking and choosing the details they want, and taking things out of context. But like you think about how history is told today, but all of it is fake. And when you're someone that actually is able to look into this, we've got a lot of great guys on our side who have done a lot of work on history and how it's been distorted.
Easy. We're on YouTube.
Okay.
We're on YouTube. But yes, you can have a look at certain events in history, and I thought that was it. I thought that was
okay. I'm just talking in general. I'm not making any. No specific thing. Just history in general. Let's just go with that.
I mean, one of the fake things that you see, just to get us off that train of thought there, is the girl. It's a very young Kirsten Dunst, and they dress her up in the traditional garb of Albania, and then they basically just turn it into a green screen. It's all digital, and there's like a sort of obsessive thing about that she has to have a cat, because if it's just a girl running through this like the streets, it's kind of a bit naff. It's like not enough. So when it's the Hollywood producer, when it's Dustin Hoffman's, like she's got to have a cat, because it's all, you get into this kind of postmodern kind of, it's all about the signs and the symbols and all of that.
And what's interesting is that if this actually happened in real life, then that image of that girl running with the cat would have been like the defining image of this fake war, which never happened. But then when things were written about it in the future, that's what everyone would remember. Like, they point out they even point out like the picture of the Vietnamese girl struck by napalm, or the V for Victory from Winston Churchill in World War II. And you could just think of all these different you can just think of all these like different events that were staged. Now, I'm not getting onto any like dicey topics here, but there's this great book that I read, and I don't think this thing is off limits on YouTube, but there's a book that I read called Another View on the Civil Rights Movement by a guy called his name was Drew Lackey, and he was a police chief of, I think it was Mobile, Alabama in the 1950s and 60s. And it's a fascinating book because what he basically says, as someone who actually was there and actually lived through these various movements, what he says about them is completely different from what you're taught in your grade 4 civics class about, how it's this great struggle against racism or something like that, and things like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King's speeches and stuff like that. All of that was essentially what's going on in this movie, Wag the Dog. It was all like a media fabrication. And then you have this, then there's this book, which I found was really interesting. This guy will come out and say, well, actually, that's not how it actually happened. There was this big riot, and some people were killed. There was lots of damage. And, this MLK guy was actually kind of a grifter. He actually wasn't really honest about what he believed. He wasn't actually anti-violence. But the problem is this, that when that's what's taught in the media, that's what's taught in the schools, that's what's shown in the media, that becomes the reality. And truth really doesn't matter all that much. So in effect, the propaganda from the 1960s for something like the civil rights movement, that has become the history. That is the history now. It's more real than the actual events that actually happen in the consciousness of the public, because basically all the access to information over it over the last 50, 60 years has just been whatever the media has reported on, and then what they taught happened in the schools. Even though it's like fake history, that's what everyone remembers.
Yeah, like so when Robert De Niro goes to hire, well, basically threaten and blackmail Dustin Hoffman into producing the fake war. That he actually gets into this, and he says if you and there's a sort of, it's edited together, so you see a load of famous images come up. So you get like Winston Churchill with his two fingers sticking up. You get the girl in Vietnam running along the road. There's like the American flag, the American army like raising the flag at where was that? Iwo Jima. And then he keeps going on about how in the first Gulf War, which had happened just a few years before this, everybody remembers there was like a missile went down somebody's chimney and blew up a house or something, and the point was like this is how precise our bombs and missiles are these days, which of course in reality America just carpet bombed the place. And the postmodern kind of French philosopher whose name I can't say, John Baudrillard, which just makes my mouth explode. He actually wrote a book saying like the Gulf War never happened, and what he meant was that, so to the people in the West, so somebody in the chat is like, oh, is this a commentary on what's happening in Russia and Ukraine? Now, it isn't really, because like that's an actual war. This is mainly about fake. There's fakeness in the media, of course, surrounding that, but like in this, they've took it to the whole new level and just manufactured the war for TV, which isn't really the case when it's a real war. The problem that we've got is that we don't know what's true and what isn't, which is why you got to be careful. But anyway, so yeah, Robert De Niro, at one point the CIA come in and they say, like, what the hell are you doing? We know there's no war going on. And he gives them this load of spiel. But it's got the girl, like the fake photo of the girl in the rubble. And he says, well, there is a war. Look, I'm seeing it on TV. And it's this thing where this becomes the reality. So what's on TV becomes the reality, not the actual real world.
And that one image of the girl holding the cat running away from the bombs, the fake one, when it's actually Kirsten Dunst, that's gonna trump any kind of like statistics, facts, data, anything that you can muster. So, like for example, let's say that the Senator Neil character, so the guy who's running against the president in the movie, who knows that the war in Albania doesn't exist, if he came out on TV and said this war doesn't exist, it's all fake, the problem he would have is that people would then say he's like this cruel, heartless bastard who doesn't care about the suffering of this poor girl, and they'd probably call him a conspiracy theorist. You'd see he would just be completely dogpiled by the entire country, even though what he's saying is correct. And you also see this playing out in our world today. Like, think about the image of that Turkish boy, I think it was, who drowned in the Mediterranean a couple years ago. That led to that huge migrant crisis in Europe. It doesn't matter what you argue. It doesn't matter if you argue, well, they're unassimilable. They don't mesh with our society. It's bad for our people. And, a lot of them are being dishonest. They're not coming from Syria. None of that matters. It's just that one image of that boy on that beach that in the normie's brain, that overrides everything. George Floyd as well. It doesn't matter what you point out. It doesn't matter what facts come out later about the George Floyd case, and it doesn't matter what damage is done by these riots. But that one image of Chauvin and George Floyd, that's what overrides everything in people's brains. They just got to give you that one image. And unfortunately, I just think that the human brain is not, it doesn't have the capacity to actually, look at the facts, statistics, process all the information, and then come to this rational conclusion by itself. That visceral image just hits you, and that always wins.
With George Floyd, it was that phrase as well, "I can't breathe." Now that would have been somebody like Robert De Niro's character who thought, right, well, that's what we've got to run with. This is going to be great catchy line for the media, the PR, the presentation that we're going to give the public. We've got like this nice catchy little line that he comes out with. I mean, I did a article on me Substack, which is there, everybody can see it, called the Ghost of Kiev pitch meeting, and it was a kind of playful article that was mainly inspired by Wag the Dog. And in it, like, so you get into the basically what I did was have a play out the scenario of Wag the Dog between like the CIA kind of deep state guy and the Hollywood producers. I mean, this is another thing. That they are like really embedded with each other. Yeah, as Blackpill was saying as well, like Barry Levinson was at the Bill Clinton. He was like really in with the Clintons and all of this kind of thing. So anyway, and on my Substack article, I made up three. So there was the Ghost of Kiev, which was like this inspirational kind of bit of PR manipulation to create a narrative for them to run with, to get people excited and get people engaged with it. But then, so that one was actually, that's what the Western media actually went with. And then I came up with another one, which I called it, what was it? It was like Sharpshooter Sonia or something, where the narrative which they were going to create was going to be like a farm boy in Ukraine, and he picks up his granddad's like sniper rifle that he had in World War II, and he becomes like a kind of crack shot, and you'll see him all over CNN and the BBC. But then, like, I realized that, well, he's going to be like a young white man with a gun, and the media is not going to like that. So instead, like in my kind of article playing around with the idea, it would be like somebody like a George Soros style funded feminist who and then she was like into Black Lives Matter, social justice warrior, like sharpshooter, two shots Sonia or something like that. And then the third narrative I thought they would come up with, which they kind of haven't. They kind of did do the sniper thing, but then what they haven't done yet was where there was going to be like a Somalian doctor in Ukraine, and he was there. He got blocked entry into into Western Europe because we're all racists, and so he went to Ukraine, and then he's like wandering around on the battlefield, like this like Somalian doctor with a white jacket on, like saving all of these European men on the other. So I thought that was another possible narrative. And it was all inspired by this kind of just outright manipulation that the media engages in, which Wag the Dog just comes flat out and says. It tells you what they're doing. In the start of the movie, about the title itself, the tail wagging the dog.
Yeah, so we just see this like today. It's something it's a weekly occurrence. I mean, you can just name your narrative, name your fake figure, and there you go. Like we had Greta Thunberg a couple years ago. We had George Floyd the year after. Who was one in 2021? I mean, there's Dr. Fauci. Now, there's Zelensky, who's basically the 2022 version of Greta Thunberg. Except it's about a war rather than climate change, and they're going to be bringing the climate change stuff back soon. But yeah, they just keep going on with these like figures. They'll create this figure. They'll have this like media. They'll pump them up in the media. They'll create this narrative about them, and it's all show. And I do also think that it is kind of something that's written for a public that's grown up on Hollywood movies. Now, I don't want to get too much into the Ukraine-Russia conflict. However, one thing that like on social media on the first couple of days, and I was at social media where I am is actually shut down. Well, not all of it, but Twitter and Facebook were shut down. Thank God. But the days that before that happened, when I was actually still on those sites, which I've now quit, they were all talking about like Harry Potter and about Star Wars and things like that, and kind of this Hollywood view of the world of like good guys and bad guys and evil empires and underdog rebels and stuff like this. It's really like cartoonish kind of comic book view of the world and view of politics. That's something that today, basically, that is the view which many people in the West actually take it to reality. So even even back in 2003 when the Iraq War was going on and stuff, sure, they had like comparisons between Saddam Hussein and, you know, some dictators in Central Europe in the 1930s. But, you know, people weren't comparing Saddam Hussein to like the emperor from Star Wars or something like that. So yeah, like all the stuff that we're seeing in this movie, it's just gotten like so much worse. It's just so much more juvenile now how disconnected people's view of reality really is. And I guess it just goes to show how dominant you know, these forces like Hollywood have been over our culture over the last, well, several decades.
I mean, yeah, so in the end, they do pull it all off, but then Dustin Hoffman decides that, well, because he's never actually won an Oscar, and he thinks that the fake war that he's made for the deep state is the best work that he's ever done. So he begins to get a little bit ahead of himself, and he starts saying, "I want the credit for all of this." And De Niro is like, "Well, you're not getting the credit. Like, you don't." And it's the same with the girl as well. Like, it's the girl's like, "Oh, great! Is this going to look? This is going to look great on my resume." And Robert De Niro, like, you can never speak about this again. And then the girl's like, "Oh, well, why not?" And he says, "Well, because men will come to your house and kill you." And then just in this kind of offhanded way. And then he's trying to get it through to Dustin Hoffman, like, you can't go running around claiming the credit for this. And then he kind of scratches the side of his face a couple of times, and you see like the blokes with the earpieces in wander off, and then you hear like the news to tell you like a little while later that he's died suddenly of a heart attack or something like that. He's just been snuffed out. So it's again, it's like it's you know, it's like a sinister thing, and but at the same time, it is an adult movie, because like we are just talking about how, you know, it's Harry Potter and Vladimir Putin's the bad guy from Harry Potter, Voldemort or whatever, Voldemort or whatever it is, and so it's like people have become more infantilized. Yet a movie from 25 years ago was explaining exactly like what the media, how the media manipulates people, how they create narratives. I mean, they know exactly the whole thing with Old Shoe, who of course they've made him a raping like lunatic in reality, just to kind of make the contrast like stronger. But like the thing is, it is they know exactly how to kind of dig into American patriotism, because there is, you know, you've got the hokey kind of country Willie Nelson singing songs, and you've got this kind of feeling of like standing up for the home of the brave and good old shoe, and all of that, which people think is like authentic. All of it's just manufactured. They know all of the little ways to get people all happy and proud that the country's off bombing somewhere, even if it isn't like sort of obvious. But today it's just kind of obvious.
You know, I could imagine there being some shitlib in 2003 watching this movie and thinking like, those Republicans and the George Bush off like cheering on a war in Iraq. And now, to be fair, yeah, I mean, the war in Iraq was a bad idea, and you know, there would have been some legitimacy to that. Like, all that patriotism was manufactured and was fake, and it did actually lead to people believing and supporting things which were actually quite terrible, both for Iraq and for the United States. But today, though, like the same people who would have thought that, you know, back in 2003, they no longer have claim to being to being like the ones who are like intellectually superior in that regard, that who don't believe, aren't like the sheep who believe what the media says, because, you know, like a lot of them are out there. I mean, the things that are coming out of Reddit now are like saying, well, you know, a nuclear war wouldn't be that bad, and if it saves just one life, then it's incredible that just how quickly that machine has just been able to whip up the population into supporting things that, you know, would have just been ludicrous at any other time. Like there was like even articles in, I think it was the New York Times, saying that I can't remember where it was exactly, but they were saying that like a nuclear war actually wouldn't be that as destructive as you might think, which is, it's just ludicrous. But the thing that for me was the most disheartening about what's happened over the last month is just how quickly and how easily, just like, some wine ant who probably sits at who probably has never heard of the country Ukraine before in her life, couldn't even locate it on a map. How now she has switched her profile picture from the medication she recently took to now a Ukrainian flag, and now she's advocating war with a nuclear superpower. It's just incredible. But they've been able to whip up the population into such a frenzy so quickly. And what we're seeing these days is that just how it's getting a lot easier. With the stuff that they went through in the movie Wag the Dog. I think today it would be a lot easier to do this. They wouldn't even have to film anything, because they'll find like some cell phone footage somewhere and take it out of context, and there you go. There's your narrative.
Remember the dancing nurses on TikTok? I mean, there's so you watch something like Wag the Dog. There's people who walk around, and they actually think that nurses from all over the place just spontaneously did like came out with these complicated dance routines to put on social media just because like we needed a boost, just because we needed a little spring in our step. And everything's going to be okay. Where we here on the NHS, look at us dancing. Look how lovable we are. Love us. We're nurses. And now you look at something which is like really cynical, like Wag the Dog, and you just think like, yeah, it was all fake. It was all fake as hell. I mean, and it was there telling you 25 years ago. I will say, like, in this era, like 1997, this was when like PR and like spin doctors, as they used to call them, all of that really came in at this time. In Britain, it would have been like Tony Blair, and you had Bill Clinton, and it was as if something happened in like the 90s where they became much more adept at manipulating. They became much more adept at spinning bad news and all of this kind of thing. I mean, this was the same year that Princess Diana died, which was another day, another good day to bury bad news, to be honest. And I think, in general, like you have to. I mean, we have to ask the question: why the hell did they make this movie? Like. And one of the explanations, I mean, there is that thing where they tell you what they're doing, because they get a kick out of it. It's a common thing that pops up on all these things. But like on a wider kind of look, zooming out a little bit, in 1997, like Russia was on its knees. Russia was in a really bad way back then. China hadn't really become what it is now, and America was completely unchallenged. America was the one global superpower. And I think something like this becomes like a sort of peak arrogance, because this is when, I think this was the same year that the Fukuyama book, or The End of History, was published.
It was a couple of years later. I think that was
a couple of years later, was it? So
the movie came out a couple years after the.
Did it? All right. Yeah. So it's just, you can see that there's this like supreme confidence in America, and it was a comfortable time as well. It was you didn't have any worries at this time. The kind of the Tony Blair mass immigration hadn't started. It was this year. It was 1997 that it came out. Another thing, of course, is that Bill Clinton actually did have sex scandals, and then they bombed a pharmaceutical plant in Nigeria to cover it up. Surprise, surprise, to knock it off the top of the headlines.
And that was after the movie came out.
Yeah, it was like a year later. They actually did the plot of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say though is that, like, I know that even back then they were manipulating people. 2001, 9/11, and Iraq War, they were manipulating people. I will say though that, like, at least then there is like an argument that could be made that of course the wars are that America's going off and fighting on are not a good idea. But at least like there was something to be patriotic about at the home front. Like I do kind of look at the late 90s, early 2000s stuff. I'm not an American, I'm Canadian, but I do kind of like the idea of like apple pie, hot dogs on the barbecue on a Saturday evening, that kind of like American patriotism. I actually see like the appeal in it. It actually does kind of look cool. Like you actually wrote that article on Substack about how Americanism actually used to be cool. I mean, it's something that's been poisonous for us in the long run, but it actually had an appeal a while back. Whereas I look at the things like the dancing nurses on TikTok today, and like to me, like this doesn't appeal to me at all. Like it's just this is like hell. So maybe they've gotten a lot better at maybe the means that they have to manipulate the public are a lot better. But it also does seem like what they're actually selling them on seems a lot harder to sell.
Yeah, because at least in the manufactured war and the narratives they create and for the news and around, they've got that. The whole thing with Old Shoe is that it is a kind of, you can imagine him being like a good old boy from like Alabama or somewhere, Ohio, like the Midwest, like a good honest farmhand and all of this kind of thing. So the standard American patriotism was something that like a deep well they could draw on, knowing that it was appreciated, knowing that when the chips were down, we can draw on that. We can draw on this idea of just a good American lad. Maybe he was a quarterback in high school. All of this stuff is thought through. And we just need to get him back home. Let's just get Old Shoe back home, get him on that plane, and the whole nation's the whole nation's like on the edge of their seats waiting. And because it's associated with forms of like it's kind of symbolic of certain American patriotism. But since then, they've deliberately killed it. So in my article that I wrote about how America's toxic rebrand, I got into this. Like when you look at the American media, when you look at Rocky or you look at Back to the Future of the 80s, America looks great. America was great at selling itself. But when you get all this woke stuff and the rainbow flags, nobody cares. It's not something that people want to go and fight and die for. And when this is what America has to draw on now, which is it doesn't seem to work as well, because they've spent all of their time hating their nation. So when all of a sudden the nation's in trouble, you think, what is it that I'm actually supposed to be standing up for here? You saw it in Afghanistan when they left behind $80 billion worth of gear for the Taliban to take over. It ends up if you've got no nation to believe in, or you don't know what it stands for, then you can't then like kind of there's no patriotic well to draw from in times of need.
And I think maybe that might be why it's so much more forceful today as well. So back in 1991 during the first Gulf War, some ordinary American guy, sure, maybe he's supporting some like foreign war that's really not in their interest or something like that, but ultimately there isn't going to actually be that many downsides to him eating up the propaganda. He feels great to be an American, and he puts his flag outside, he puts the yellow ribbon out for the soldiers, and he goes home happy that evening. Sure, there are problems with it, but then for the most part, it doesn't actually affect him that negatively, other than maybe the tax dollars that it wastes. But with the stuff today, though, like this stuff, it's just so in your face, and it has to be there constantly. All the media, all of the entire education system, every single one of these narratives that they put out, it's always just meant to make you feel guilty about something. It's always this like it's always this like more emotionally charged and extremely moralistic this an extremely moralistic outrage. And to be honest, this is what I dislike about the West the most today, is just how like not only do we have all this like degeneracy and all this horrible like propaganda and stuff, but it's just how like moralistic and how this like low level enforcement of it. So it's not even anymore It's not even like you're going to just get whacked if you're someone high up who doesn't go along with it. You're at risk of getting being on the outs with your own family members if at the dinner table you make a wrong comment or you question any of it. Which is why I just feel like this stuff is just it's getting so much more it's just getting so much more poison and is driving people mad, and which is I think that's just why it has to be enforced just at just every level of society in the most minute in the most minute ways like that.
I mean, Key Buckley says in the chat there, they even had it down where when they were going to bring old Shoe home, they were going to like rub a little bit of dog food on the sleeve of his jacket or whatever, and then they were going to have like a dog, like so there's all this pomp and ceremony there. They had like cheering crowds that he'd finally made it home, and they were even going to have it so there was like dog food, so that eventually they'd get it so that a dog like spontaneously or not so spontaneously ran across the runway and jumped up at him to welcome it home. Like all of these little traits that they thought through. It's really genius when you think of it.
Yeah, and you see that stuff today as well. Like there was these videos. It was when they had the migrants who got into Belarus and they were trying to get them in, and they were trying to get into the EU, into Poland. They even had like these videos of people like blowing smoke into their eyes to make it look like they were crying. There's the staged videos of like the migrants like yelling yes when they arrive on the beaches in like I don't know, Italy or somewhere like that. They do really think about these very minute details. It is like producing a movie, as Dustin Hoffman's character is doing. It's all show business, really. One thing I also find fascinating about the movie is that they have like that fake song about the old shoe song. That's not only the only fake song they have. They have like 3 or 4 of them. Like that, they have that song at the end. So after there's after the real William Schumann, because they got the real guy was a military prisoner. So as Morgoth had mentioned, he had raped a nun, but he was somebody who had been in the military, and because they wanted anyone who had a military background with the name Shoe, and they got this guy. But at the end of the movie, after he gets shot, and then they have this fake funeral for him, they're playing this like marching song for this regiment called the 303. But that's also fake too, because earlier in the movie, they come up with that Robert De Niro comes up with the idea for 303 when they're brainstorming ideas at Dustin Hoffman's house, and someone asks him, "Oh, what time is it?" And he's like, "Oh, 3:03 in the morning." They come up with the name of the regiment, 303. And as someone who I'm not someone who knows that much about the military, they could come up with any name, and then I'd probably believe it. So they could say like, oh, Delta X9 Gamma whatever, and then to someone who's not initiated, it just sounds real. And they have this marching song at the end with the 303, and it's incredible that that's something that's just completely fictitious.
They do it at the start as well with the B-3 bomber. When it's like the sex scandal's just breaking out and they're trying, they haven't found out what they're going to do yet. And De Niro arranges it so that they drop into the journalists that they're not basically the government's line now, we're not going to be taking any questions on the B-3 bomber. Now, in actual fact, there's no such thing as a B-3 bomber. It doesn't exist. But what that means is that because they have dropped that into the news, like the sort of the press morons, then they all immediately, well, what is it then? And what is the B-3? What is the? So then they all get sidetracked. They all get sent off in the wrong direction and say, well, what do you mean we're not taking questions about the B-3? Well, you have to now. And of course, it's just a red herring. It's just all fake. And it'll be like Guardian opinion pieces, or the Guardian opinion pieces on the B-3. But what they're really doing is just covering up something else. You hear it a lot. It's a good day to bury bad news. There's all kinds of bad news. There's all kinds of stories waiting to drop in Britain. Like they have to kind of offload them from time to time. And there's all kinds of dodgy things waiting for the day the Queen dies. Like the day after the Queen dies, look at some of the minor articles in the newspapers. It'll make your jaw drop.
Yeah. So like one thing that that happens really often is that if you know a lot about something and then it's reported on in the media, you're going to think, what are they talking about? They have no clue what they're talking about. But then the people who don't know a lot about that subject, that's all they absorb. So, I mean, like an example anyone can look at is just search any figurehead in the dissident right up on Google. All the results that come up are going to be like, oh, white supremacist, terrorist, and it's just outlandish. But then if you actually watch this person's videos and you follow this person, you know that the description is completely inaccurate. But that's what the normies are going to get. Like an example of this that's like penetrated the discourse in America is the word. This is not like that big now, but about 10 years ago it was the word assault rifle. So one thing that all the liberals were saying was that we need to ban the sale of assault rifles. Now here's the thing: assault rifle is not a classification of a weapon. There's no such thing as an assault rifle. What makes something an assault rifle and what makes it not an assault rifle is like there's no actual definition. You can say it's an automatic rifle, but I'm pretty sure those are already banned in the United States. But then you'll have people who have no clue what they're talking about advocating legislation because they heard this word assault rifle whenever there was a shooting in America. Like I actually tested this with my mother. I showed her a picture of a rifle and then a picture of another one. I owned one when I was back in Canada and had a wooden stock. And she said, "Well, I think that one's okay because it can be used for hunting and stuff like that. It's not an assault rifle." But then I showed her a picture of the exact same gun, but with a synthetic stock instead of a wooden stock, and she said that one should be banned just because of the aesthetics of the gun and what was associated by the media with a weapon that looks like this. And when you think of that, like it's just incredible how they can say almost anything about any topic, and people who aren't fully informed about that will believe it. And it'll work on me too, because there's plenty of things out there that I don't know a lot about. And when if I heard a B-3 bomber, I think maybe there is a bomber called the B-3. I would have no idea that it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, so I think one of the problems that we've got today is that in Wag the Dog, it's one narrative that they need. It's like there's one problem, there's one crisis that they have to deal with. So they're going to invent this ridiculous fake war to cover that up, so that people aren't paying attention anymore. But it is just the one thing. But in the West now, I get the feeling where they've got 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 of these different kind of fake narratives that they have to, like, it's like a juggler keeping lots of plates in the air at the same time. And I mean, just look at the what's he called, Zelensky, when he came out, and it was an obvious green screen. Like, and everybody's just laughing at the fact that his green screen on that video looks worse than the girl with the cat from this 1997 digital thing they made, where that Dustin Hoffman made in Wag the Dog. That looks more realistic than what Zelensky was standing in front of. And so you question one of them, and then before you can kind of process it properly, you've already been whiplashed over to the other one, and then it's back over to another one. And I think this is the problem that we have now, is that we're just overwhelmed by this stuff. There's like they're wagging the dog all over the place. There's a multitude of different narratives and different fake stories, and you get this kind of, well, I do, where you get this kind of burnout where you just want to kind of switch it all off, because if you try and get to the bottom of each different thing that comes out on a daily basis, you'd go mad.
Yeah, it's the perfect way to just keep the population under control, because I feel like the average person doesn't have the mental capacity to even remember the thing that they were arguing with someone on Twitter over 3 months ago, because there's always just like this as soon as that whatever fake crisis dies down, well, then here you go, you got your new crisis, and now that entire one seems to just be completely forgotten. I will say that a lot of guys on our side actually fall into this trap as well. Not that we don't need to get into it too much, but like a lot of times, for example, like a lot of the things that went on with the big illness and then the medication from a couple months ago, a lot of guys on our side were saying, "Oh, well, that's over now." Those wacky conspiracy theorists proven wrong, schizophrenics and stuff like that. When there's this conflict with Ukraine that just comes, and now it's this new shiny narrative that we can all debate about and infight over and call each other a controlled opposition and chills and stuff about. But then the problem is this, that the regime has just gotten away with something like horrific. And even the dissidents, even the people who are meant to, not all, but even like a portion though, even the people who are actually meant to be like opposing the regime and holding it to its standards can be distracted and then just forget about what they had done just days earlier because there's this new crisis there, and in some ways like it's a perfect way for them to get away with their past dirty deeds. Like a lot of stuff. Oh yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting what you've touched on there, because in Wag the Dog, in the sort of the Baudrillard take on it, where the Gulf War never happened. So in other words, you're viewing the world through the media, and the media is fake. The media is lying about it. But your understanding of it is that it is the images, it's the missile going down the chimney. It's the girl with her skin burnt in Vietnam, and these images. This is how you process. So that image of the little girl in Vietnam. That is the Vietnam War to the like American masses, if you like. And so when the thing is like that would have been like a girl who was burned. It's not like Baudrillard is saying these things didn't happen in reality. He's saying that our understanding of them is fake and not real. But you see, in reality, there's a girl like with her skin burnt off. In reality, there's people who are being incinerated in buildings in Baghdad, and that is what we're not kind of processing properly. So, in the case of the war, let's say what's going on now, there's a sense that it isn't real to us. Because we're in the social media age, we're viewing it through those little videos on Telegram or Twitter, or like deep dives on YouTube via the Duran, and then you've got all of the normies just sort of consuming the mass media, the Wag the Dog style mass media, and so it stays a few steps removed from you. It isn't actually the reality of the war; it's a crafted thing, but when you get to the pandemic and what was kind of demanded of everybody, and the certain treatments, then it changes, because then that actually did become a reality that was like affecting people's families directly, and that's something quite different. So all of the propaganda and all of the narratives that they had were one thing, but then it actually did kind of it kind of sprung through the screen and the real world, and has real world consequences to this day.
That's actually what I made my last video about. So when the conflict with Ukraine started, I actually am located in St. Petersburg, Russia right now. And, there was this huge, I made my last video about this, there's this huge spectacle on social media with, the shit libs talking, comparing it to Star Wars or Harry Potter, or saying what would the Marvel Avengers do if they were in Ukraine, or some shit like that. And then, a lot of our guys also, they were just coming up with all these hot takes. You just every post you'd make, it would be greeted by an argument about which government has more people of a certain ethnic religious background from the Middle East, which government, Russia or Ukraine, which one has more of them in the government, and are you a shill or are you a shill? And for me, it really wasn't that entertaining, because like my first thoughts were, well, what is this going to mean for me? Like, this is something that it could actually have an impact on my life. And now not of course it hasn't actually been that bad so far, so I'm fine, everything's going as normal for me, but it's something that like actually has an impact and stuff. And kind of the entire like hyper reality of the hot takes, infighting on social media, the ridiculous like propaganda stories about the ghost of Kiev and things like that. It really just it really just kind of does look really ridiculous, and it does seem like detached from reality. When as you, I think the phrase I heard from you, it's the desert of the real. So in post-modernity, we have the hyper reality of social media, of these. It could be the exploding tanks and stuff like that, and they're in the desert of the real. There actually is somebody exploding in that tank, but then the hyper reality is someone on Twitter talking about like them destroying an AT-AT in Star Wars or something like that. It does actually jump through. It does actually jump through to you, and you actually do have to make the decisions in your you have to make the decisions that affect the real world in your actual life. And when it comes to the pandemic, because you actually did have, now don't want to get into it here, but you actually did have a major decision to make, and that's something that has. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's this thing. It is interesting when like they'll say like, well, this particular thing is over now, and what they really mean is that the media's dropped it. But it's had consequences for people in the real world. In the real world, like people are suffering. In the real world, people are getting rushed into hospital. People are like collapsing. There was I was just seeing before at the Miami Open, 15 tennis players in that tournament have dropped out because of they couldn't carry on. Then there's something wrong with them. I'll put it that way.
Incredible.
15 tennis players have won. So it's not over for them. This idea where this is the problem. I mean, if you're a dissident, you're going to have to get your head wrapped around this, because just because the media and the social media frenzy has moved on to the next new thing, it doesn't mean what happened in the last thing has ceased to exist, that it's kind of just gone away and disappeared. No. This is what we mean. When it comes through the screen and it affects you in the real world, it doesn't go away very quickly at all. It's there to stay. Once it kind of breaks the bounds of the digital and the television screen and it enters into the real world, then it doesn't just go away with the news cycle. It doesn't go away because it's not trending on Twitter anymore. The same can be said for the war in Ukraine. The same can be said for refugees and things. It just because like it has consequences for people in the real world. And I know, like, people will say, oh, well, we're all just atomized, sitting in behind our computers and all this these days. And I think that gets a little bit overdone, to be honest. Like, people still enjoy their lives. People are still out and about all of the time, living in the real world. And they're going to face the consequences of these things, whether or not it's trending on Twitter.
Yeah, so I guess that's kind of when the fake postmodern world that's been created, the hyper reality, when that actually can't hold back the actual reality. And I do wonder, is this kind of political model, and I'm making my next video about this, but is this political model actually viable long term for the regime? And I do wonder if it actually is, because it is extremely effective at getting people to go along with things like in the here and now. It's just like it's like a runaway train with no brakes, though. So, in terms of like getting people to go along with whatever crisis, whatever outrage, pick the right side that you're supposed to fall down on. It's very good at getting people to go along with that. But I think the problem is that eventually that train's going to run up. That train's going to fly off the tracks. The reality, I think, will actually just burst into the room eventually, and it won't care about what narrative is here or there. The truth, I think, might actually eventually just come barging in, and that'll spell trouble for the regime, but it also spells trouble for us and us as well. I mean, I'm not necessarily looking forward to that when the consequences of all these decisions that they've made actually come back to bite.
I mean, I just looked at my notes there, and there's Woody. There's just a little funny thing that the old shoe, when they get him to wear a woolen jumper, and then when they actually see they take a photo of him, which is supposed to be him captive in Albania, and then it's got lots of little holes in the jumper, and then they say, well, what does it mean? So it becomes another little mini narrative spin-off. Well, why has he got all of those strange holes in his jumper? And then it turns out that it's supposed to be Morse code, and it just means it means stay strong, mom. So it's like they've embedded narratives within narratives, because then you're going to get people who figured that out. Oh, look at this. I know what those strange shaped holes are on his jumper. It means stay strong, mom. Of course, that's all fake as well. But what that does is kind of, it makes people it adds depth to it, because then there's another layer of narrative. Oh, look at this. Look at this. Look at this secret that I've unraveled here. Aren't I so clever that he's got stay strong mom in Morse code on his jumper that he's wearing there? And so what it is, I think in the traditional media, when they've got one story to sell, like in Wag the Dog, they can have little narratives coming off it like that, and whatever comes their way, they can keep spinning it, and they can keep that up for quite a long time. But I think in the digital realm, it's a little bit different, because it's if everything's like everything's trending and it can disappear within an hour. And so you end up with this kind of constant, like Twitter's, I've said it a million times, Twitter's the worst, because they're in this constant sort of mode of expectation of the next new thing that's going to drop, the next new bit of news to get everybody excited, the next new bit of meat that's going to be thrown in for the piranhas. But what this does is put you in a kind of mental state of constant preparation and of constant anxiety. But the previous narratives who've fallen by the wayside, they become kind of like dead clutter that's got to be handled. That's got to be like swept under the rug of the new. As the new stuff comes in, they've got to get rid of the old. And I think this is like what the sort of the big tech kind of technocrat types, they overestimate this. I think people aren't, the people, you'll talk about people having like the attention spans of goldfish these days, which they do because of this crap. But at the same time, there's still a lot of people are thinking, hang on a minute, what about the last thing? Like, we weren't even finished with that thing, and now we've got the new thing, and the last thing's just what we're supposed to just forget about it. I think it kind of builds up a kind of backlog of unanswered questions and half-finished narratives,
because they don't really cover their tracks for the stories that are exposed as completely fake. What they just do is just move on and stop talking about it, and then hope that it goes away. Think about like a few examples: the collapsing people in China. That one was fake, but that was all over the media, and I think that was actually leaked to the alt media first, and that it was actually people in the alternative media that were showing that stuff first, which is pretty. That's a pretty sharp trick that they pulled on that one. But there's that one that was proven false, but no consequences for it. The ghost of Kiev, that was fake, but I think it was like a U.S. senator or someone. That Tucker Carlson talked about this, that someone had photoshopped Sam Hyde's face onto the pilot, saying this is the ghost of Kiev. There's the meme that every time there's like a mass shooting in America, they post pictures of Sam Hyde, and it usually works. It'll get people retweeting it, saying, "Oh, this is this white male terrorist," when it's actually Sam Hyde. But then it actually worked on a representative in the United States, that they tweeted out this picture of Sam Hyde, which looked terrible. I mean, the Photoshop job was terrible on that. But then, like, there's no accountability for any of it. So like they just have all these psyops which are just proven to be completely false. They never have to answer for any of it. Like, or for example, like another one from 2020, one that I still can't believe they actually tried this one, was that they said that in 2020 the BLM riots actually had not only not spread the certain illness which they were talking about a couple of weeks earlier, there was actually people that came out and said that it had slowed down the spread of the illness. And they even had like these doctors sign, doctors, really political actors, come out and sign this letter saying that the police should not try to shut down these protests when there's tens of thousands of people in the streets. When weeks earlier, 100 people in the streets would have been called like, oh, horrible people who are spreading this illness and stuff like that. But then weeks later, tens of thousands of people are in the streets, and they're saying that this stuff is actually helping other people, that it's actually helping alleviate this illness. I mean, I don't know how anyone could be stupid enough to actually believe this, but like, how has the credibility of these institutions which push this, like the medical sphere, the industry of health, how can people in this industry publish that and not just lose all credibility right away? I mean, it's amazing, but I do think that maybe their credibility is actually declining, not as quickly as we would like it. But I do think that people do seem to be more, at least more skeptical towards this sphere right now. Like I was never someone who thought too much about pharmaceuticals or anything like that, but it's something I'm starting to wonder about. But yeah, like they just build up all this bad publicity, and it doesn't seem like they have any way of actually coping with it other than just moving on and hoping no one notices.
Yeah, I mean, at least in Wag the Dog, you're dealing with mainly the government, the deep state, and Hollywood. Like, that's it. And I think what's happened is that the more this has kind of infected everything, and so eventually everything becomes politicized. Everything has to have a narrative to it. In 1997, like a lot of the institutions around, say, medicine and whatnot, and to be honest, even something like NATO was seen as like relatively benign. People believed in them. But this kind of politicization of everything, and everything has to be like, with a rainbow flag. Everything has to be politicized. Everything has to have like its own narrative and guilt trip people and have a friend enemy distinction and all of this kind of thing. Like it's eventually it just spreads to everything, and so everything is coming into question. In the case of what's happening now, I mean, one take that you could have on that is like it's a last sort of desperate attempt to kind of shore up the West and give it some kind of meaning, which is some things like people like Richard Spencer have come out with, but where at least we've got a common struggle again. Even though we had a different one just 2 years ago, and that all that did was divide everybody. This time, it's kind of the same again, but I've got the feeling that a lot of people are just, well, as I certainly am, are kind of keeping a low profile, because this could spiral out of hand, and I don't want to be called a traitor to the country, to add to just like add on to all the other things that I'm accused of. I don't want to be accused of that either.
Yeah, I'm actually extremely worried about it. I mean, if you're going to get called a traitor, what am I going to get called?
Yeah, well, you'd be off to Siberia, like I you all kicked out the country. But if they
well, what about if I go back to the West? Then what would they call me? They look at my passport and say, "Oh, look at this visa,"
and your injection status.
Yeah, and I'm wrong, so I'm going to be on the outs of that one. Probably. I mean, man, when the social credit system comes in, I think I might actually be probably the lowest of the low. I think I might have I might have a royal flush on that one. But
I don't know. I mean, I don't know where you're heading next. I hope it is in England, like, because we'll probably get a volcano eruption or a fucking earthquake or something like that. Just like Jonah wandering around the world, and everywhere you go turns into a disaster zone.
Yeah, but yeah, well, I think though one thing that on the point you made about that I think you said Spencer had made, that they're trying to give the West meaning. Do you think that a movie like this could be made today? Whereas the '90s was an era of like cynicism, and people saying someone could be like some middle of the road liberal saying, "Oh, that stuff that's on TV, it's propaganda," and they could like feel like intelligent and feel cool by saying that. But today, like the population just feels so much more religious. It's religious without a real religion, but you're actually meant to believe in these narratives wholeheartily. Whereas in the '90s, it was really kind of just everything was cynical, it was nihilistic. But today, like the way that they're selling these crises, they're meant for the public to take on this like religious fervor. So would they actually be able to make a movie like this today? Whereas they're trying to actually sell the public that this stuff is sincere.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because in a way, Wag the Dog is peak 1990s cynicism. It's all about kind of blowing up the your belief in a certain kind of set of institutions and whatnot. And I'm just going to get this super chat before it goes from Nicholas Littlefield. Thank you very much. Endeavour, can you make a video comparing Russian and US media on this Ukraine crisis while you are there? Maybe gives normies some insight. So that's one for you, Endeavour.
I can't. It's better if I don't. It'd be a little. It could be cause trouble for me. So I don't think I will.
Yeah. So I think another thing when you look at the thank you very much for that. Another thing when you look at Wag the Dog is that I think you have to ask what audience did they have in mind when they made this? And I think it wasn't actually people on the right. I think it was people on the left. I think there was a certain, I think there was a certain kind of quite sophisticated liberal who would really get on board with something like Wag the Dog because it would make them feel intelligent and they would flatter their intelligence a bit. And when you get into, say, 25 years later, having been through what we've been through, it looks and feels completely different. It looks like first of all, you take it very seriously because we've seen this playbook play out for the last 20 years, and then you think, well, it adds to the distrust that we've got. Yeah, in 1997, I mean, Blackpill mentioned this as well. People weren't talking about the deep state in 1997. People weren't really talking. Oh, the only person talking about a deep state before the Trump election was Alex Jones. There may be some of the more sophisticated conspiracy types as well, but not in the way like talk of the deep state now is mainstream. Everybody accepts it's a thing. Everybody accepts that there's a kind of deeper level of government which you can't vote out, which is basically dictating policy. In 1997, people thought if that president got voted out, that would be it. There'd be a whole new ideology, it would be like a different thing. They even have like a fake advert in it as well about don't change the horse in midstream, which is to say, like, don't do anything. Don't just leave things as they are to the normies. And I think there's a certain brand of liberal would like that. The condescending, cynical attitude of Wag the Dog. I think many a liberal of 1997 would have enjoyed it. And I think the same liberals today would be quite horrified by it and by the scabs that it's picking at, by the way that it really panders to a sort of dissident right, despite who made it. Because what it does is breed like a deeply distrustful sentiment about how we view power and institutions like Hollywood.
Yeah, and in the 90s, the liberals were the ones who were cynical, and the conservatives would have been the ones who were meant to believe in like the American dream and apple pie and baseball nationalism, and that's completely flipped today. They're the ones who are it's the liberals who genuinely believe in globo homo, climate change, anti-racism, whatever John Lennon's imagined world, and it's people on the right that are now like cynical about it.
You can see in the folksy songs, the whole way they handle Old Shoe. You can see that the people who are being tricked here are like new boomer normie cons or whatever. They're like basically Republican voters. It isn't stated specifically, I think, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican who's in office, but you can see it's basically, if you have a look at the people who are being like easily led morons, it's kind of Fox News viewers. It isn't like, because in the 90s the liberals would have thought of themselves as being like way above that, and yet you fast forward a few decades and it's the people on the right who are the dissidents, not just the sort of the hardcore fringes, but even somebody like Tucker Carlson's like a bit of a rogue. You see all of the Trump got banned from Twitter, Alex Jones is banned, everybody gets banned from everything. So these are now the people who are on the outsides of it, and it's those liberals who are now the center of power. So they would probably be more uncomfortable with a movie like Wag the Dog today than what people on the right would be.
Yeah, and I just also thought of Robert De Niro's character, just how useful he would be today. I'm sure that the White House actually does have like dozens of people like him. One thing I like in the movie is that they never actually say what position he has. So there's some character, I think it's the CIA agent or something, but he says, "What exactly is your job? What do you do for the president?" And he doesn't give a straight answer. Or at the very beginning of the movie, when the sex scandal breaks. They're having that meeting in the White House, and he's saying, "Okay, there's a sex scandal that's coming out now," and then someone says to him, "Don't you care if it's true? Don't we want to find out? Wait to know if it's true or not?" And he says, "Doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's already going to be reported on." So he has like he's basically taken on. He's fully embraced postmodernism. He knows that truth in the postmodern world really doesn't matter. It's all about the narrative that you can spin. And I think that that these governments must have like dozens of people, if not hundreds, working for them that are like Robert De Niro's character in this film.
Yeah, they are in the business of creating reality for people to live in. Of it's a like the cathedral stuff. It's like a truth manufacturing machine, and then people walk around thinking this is the truth. This is the truth that I live in. The truth that I live in is that Albania um, is against American freedom and American democracy and American values, and they've got a suitcase with a nuclear one, and that's it's true because the television said so. There's a really bear in mind this is before 9/11 as well, and there's a really strange little line in the because De Niro has to pull rank on the CIA fella, which takes some doing. He has got connections which are like even above the CIA, and he tells them that as well. But what he says as well is that the old school way of thinking, which he's having a kind of pop at the CIA, and he's saying they're out of date. But what he says is that the future of warfare is not going to be grand battles. It's going to be dissidents on television with bombs and suitcases. Like he literally says that. So I mean, you immediately think of like Bin Laden and all of that kind, but you can see it in the hit pieces. You can see it in January the 6th, the demonization of the sort of conservative normicon the Republicans in America and the alt right and all of this kind of thing. So he's actually predicting a future where instead of it being, I think there's something a bit more to this as well. But he's saying like the dissidents, the war of the future, what you'll see on the television will be small groups of disorganized terrorists on screen. And it's really weird.
And that's what it's been for the last 20 years or so. 20 years since 9/11. And that
Yeah.
the big enemy that they had the war on terror, the war on terror for 20 years, and now today they've transitioned to like the war on the various conspiracy theorists, the racists, the people who didn't take their medication, the people who are pro Russia or something like that. Now it's like it's always like the those who are opposed to the system. They'll find like some way to pathologize, to morally condemn those opposed to the system and turn them into the enemy, and then rally the public against them.
And this is because it was in the aftermath of so this is 1997. Say in 1991 you've got the fall of the Soviet Union, and this is where you get ideas about like the end of history, where all of the and in a way neoconservatism played into that, which again this film kind of predicts, where everyone is on the path to becoming a liberal democracy consumer. And so, like the grand battles, the grand ideological struggles are now at an end. Everybody is on the same path to become like America, basically. But then they still have to define who their enemies are. So they're going to look for people who are not happy about that path, which would be the Islamic radicals or far right extremists. But in the far right extremists in particular are internal, so that becomes like that becomes the next battle to be fought, and you can see it. It's been going on for years.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention, toward the end, is I do really like Dustin Hoffman's character as well. Now, I'm not gonna say anything that you can't say on YouTube, but I must say that they really play him up to the stereotype of his ethnic background in this movie, which I thought was hilarious. Like he's this effeminate, narcissistic Hollywood film producer, and there was a great line that they had in the movie that he's saying like it's like sending you a Christmas card without what do you call it? And then the guy says fruitcake. He's like, yeah, fruitcake. So I think they even snuck it in there that Dustin Hoffman doesn't know anything about Christmas because he doesn't celebrate it. I thought that was really good. Um, uh, but yeah, like it's interesting also that like his character. He's the film producer. He knows how to tell a great story. He just knows like, oh, we need a war, we need a hero, we need this like poor little girl with a kitten. But at the end, it's actually not even like it's not even any like commitment to truth or any kind of a moral opposition to the deception and the lies that it's caused. It's that he just won't get credit for it. That's actually what gets him that's what gets him to say he wants to expose the scandal because he produced it and he wants credit for this great production. And it goes to show that as well that someone, no matter how high they are, when they're no longer beneficial to they're no longer beneficial to the power structure, to the deception, to the lies, to those in power, they can be off very quickly. So think about something like Epstein or various other people who have been thrown under the bus when they no longer were on board, and it's very easy for them to do that. It's also Machiavellian. Like I do love how Machiavellian Robert De Niro's character really is, and what it's saying is that basically the way that media is used to control the U.S. public, it's just all Machiavellian.
I mean, they've got there's a scene where they're bringing the old Chew back, and he becomes like this sex beast on the aeroplane, or it's a bit farcical, but the aeroplane crashes, and the main characters all survive, and the pilots die, and they're like walking across. They end up sitting on a tractor, going across Kansas or somewhere, and they come across like a little gas station or something in the middle of nowhere or a farm, and he then goes on to like he tries to rape the local girl, and her dad like shoots him dead. So you've got like rapes and deaths going on left, right, and center. But Anne Hesh and the main characters, they just don't give a damn. They don't care one bit. It's all just about the narrative. I'm just going to pick this up for NOK 100. I don't know what that is, but thank you very much. Do you know what that is, Endeavour? NOK 100? Goodwill Hunting appeals to a similar audience. I am a smart liberal, read Chomsky, know the gay is rotten, but the happy ending still involves taking the high-paying Wall Street or Pentagon job. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Thank you very much for the super chat. There's a whole raft of those kinds of above it, cynical kind of liberal movies in the 90s. Which it's a Gen X thing where the irony that you see in something like South Park and The Simpsons, eventually it kind of did it did reach quite high up, and it became this cynicism just seemed to seep into everything. And I would say Wag the Dog is that it's a very, very hard cynical movie. You'd expect. I mean, by the way, I will say, like, I always had a sweet spot for Anne Hesh. I just think she's gorgeous. She still looks good as well. I looked her up. She's only in her early 50s, but I expected her to be like a more sympathetic character, like to have somebody in it which would be like the voice of reason or a moral conscience, as if to say, well, hang on a minute, is it really okay to just tell this like this scale of lies to the public? And there's nothing like that in it at all. Oh, I've got another one. Thanks a lot, Travis. I know Travis. I like Travis. Have either of you seen the Second Civil War? It's on HBO movie that also came out in '97. It was prophetic satire. I do. Endeavour's more in tune with the Civil War. Do you know that one? Well, I don't know where he is. Looks like I'm on my own. No, I don't know much about the second Civil War. I don't know much about that one. She would have a sweet spot for you, Morgoth. I like to think of it. She had an affair with Ellen DeGenerate. I think I remember that. I remember that broke me heart when I read that part. But
Oh,
but
sorry, I was muted. I haven't heard of that movie either. My bad.
But all good things. She turns out she had a couple of kids and she became like a good sort of mom, house mom living somewhere. So fair play. Anne Hesh came good in the end. But it's a specific kind of like sort of little blonde bob, that pixie look. I really like it. It's you don't see it as much these days. Right. I'll tell you any parting shots, Endeavour. What we're going next week? Or next month.
Next month. I have a couple of ideas. I'm thinking I might choose actually a foreign film. There's this Polish film called Katyn. It's a World War II film, which I thought was really interesting. It'll be on my channel, so the dicey topics. I'll be the one walking on the landmine, but I'll do it for the benefit of our audience. I'll do it. And for the guy that super chatted me, that asked in the super chat, if he wants to message me on Telegram and he wants to discuss the media coverage of the conflict in Ukraine, you can do that. But I probably won't be making like very much content about that explicitly, just because there's some legal stuff in Russia that I kind of want to avoid. But yeah, good movie. I recommend it. It's an eye opener. That just remember it came out before anyone knew about any of this stuff. So yeah.
I suppose while I'm streaming on my YouTube channel, I'll just say my Substack is there where you can support me for a price of a cup of coffee per month. And what I do is everything that I do goes on the Substack. So I do things like the Morgcast, which don't go on YouTube. And I think a lot of people tend to not know what's going on. Like they don't know it exists. But I post that on as a podcast on my Substack, my longer form discussions, a bit like this one with different people. Sometimes I'll just do a solo podcast, which I did recently. I did a 40-minute analysis of the road, the apocalypse, and I'm also writing again. I've got a few. So this last week I've been on AAs. I did a Morgcast, and I've done this. So I think next week I've got a few written articles lined up. So you'll probably not hear me voice next week because I'm going to do a few articles for the Substack. So everything that I do for the price of a cup of coffee a month goes on Substack, and you can get it all, as well as a lot of extras. But thanks a lot then, and we will see you next time on Endeavour's channel. See you later.